So it is about 10 to noon on August 11th, and this video is not going to go out for a very, very long time whenever I decide that I actually want it to go out. You guys know I, a few weeks ago, posted a video saying that I was going to be taking a big extended break from my YouTube channel because the next couple months are going to be freaking crazy. I'm getting married here in now less than 3 months, and a lot of things have changed over the last couple of weeks since I made that video that have made things not necessarily more stressful, but have changed a lot of the course of how the wedding's going to go. So I really wanted to focus more of my time doing that and actually go back to enjoying reading again and really just kind of get back into the swing of things. And once I get married, a lot of the stress that I'm having is going to be alleviated because I'll have gone through the day, things of that nature. I did get my dress altered though on Saturday, just Saturday past, which was awesome, but very, very expensive. If you ever go through a ceremony, go through getting married and all that, make sure you know ahead of time how much the dress is going to cost to get altered, because that was expensive. This weekend on Saturday is my bridal shower, which I'm really excited about because we're splitting it up into like 2 different parties. We have family coming in earlier in the day, and then I have friends that, if they're able to make it, are going to come and hopefully have a bonfire. We were supposed to get some storms here this week, so I hope that by Saturday it kind of clears up and we don't have to worry about there being a storm. The whole purpose of this vlog really was to be not just a little bit of a catch-up, but also to be a reading vlog and review video for The Stand by Stephen King. You guys know I was doing this year, starting up with a Stephen King reading series where I read his books chronologically from his first published works all the way to his newest work. And where there was some overlap with like books that might be within the same world or kind of the same series based on what I could find with like Wikipedia, that's kind of how I've gone with this. But there is a possibility that there will be some books I do have overlap with other books that I didn't realize that I might not have known, because I just went off of a Wikipedia page really of and what I had already personally known in terms of some books that overlapped. Like I knew for a fact that Insomnia is related to the Dark Tower series, and that was basically it. So for everything else, I'm going to try to read in chronological order, but series I will read from beginning to end. That's it, to see the entirety of the series at one time and then go back to the next published work that came after the first book. So right now I'm on The Stand. I wanted to read this in June, didn't finish it, didn't even really start it until the very end of June, unfortunately, but did get through about 70 pages of it during the House Cupathon, which was really good. And then I put it down throughout the entirety of July because I had a very specific TBR I wanted to do for July and decided to pick it back up here in August. Now, what was really nice is even though I had stopped reading it for about a month, I didn't get so far into the book that I couldn't remember what exactly had gone on. There really wasn't a lot that happened. The first 70 pages of the book is basically just talking about how this massive pandemic had basically swept through the world and kind of like how individual kinds of people are being affected by it. Like that's all the first 70 pages was, so it's not really a big deal. The book itself though is like 1,153 pages, which is big. It is very hefty. This is also the complete uncut edition because the original version of The Stand that was published was only, I think, about 750 pages if I'm not mistaken. So this though was the original book that he basically had wanted to put out before his publisher had said, hey, you need to go through and cut a lot of this stuff. This is still not even, I think, the complete edition, because he did still cut out a few things that he definitely was like, yeah, these things need to stay out of here. They don't work for the story. But this is just the pretty much almost original version of the book that he had originally wanted to get published, but his publisher had said he can't, because at that time there was only so much that they could do that they felt like would be able to be marketed well. So they had him cut out like 400, almost 500 pages, I think, of the book itself. So right now, I started this back up yesterday. I am on page 90. Yesterday I read about 19 pages. Again, still not really moving anywhere in terms of the plot. This is still really delving into like all the different kinds of characters in this world and how this sickness is basically spread over the course of the story. Because if you don't know, The Stand is basically about this disease, this pandemic that is happening, which is very timely for right now. Probably wasn't a good idea to start this right now, but because of the series I was planning on doing, it kind of just fell in this really coincidental time, but basically this is a story about how a plague of sorts, kind of, it's similar to like the symptoms of the flu, which oddly enough, again, similar to like coronavirus. The flu essentially starts up in this government bunker area, and it essentially spreads from there. It gets released into the world, and it is fast acting. People die within like 3-4 days of them contracting it, essentially. And it's very quick to spread. It's very quick to incubate and very quick to kill off people. And so the first like 90 pages so far has been just talking about how it spread, where it started, how it spread to these different areas, and how different people in those areas caught it, how they spread it, how they died, all these things. I do know that there is one main character whose name is Stu, who I've already met. He's part of this like small town area that gets hit with the virus, and he's taken away for some reason. I don't remember exactly why. This is one of those books though where like there's so many things happening and so many people being talked about at once that it's hard for you to like differentiate between who is the main character and who is not until you get a good long way into the book. The same thing kind of happened with Salem's Lot. I do know from previous experience and from talking to some people that Stu is a main character who a lot of people really seem to like. So I'm interested to see how this whole thing plays out, because like I said, there hasn't been much in terms of the plot that has developed. This is supposed to be kind of a post-apocalyptic, post-pandemic story, and the surviving individuals of this pandemic are all kinds of nutso wacko kind of things. So hey guys, so it is currently 10:15 in the evening on August 12th. I have reached page 154 of The Stand. I think at this point where I'm at in the book, we have reached a point where I think we've already met, and I think we've established who are like the main characters of this book. But I am seeing in this extended uncut edition that there were probably a lot of things that were cut from this book, and there were, and I think I know what they were. I think a lot of the story that was cut was a lot of the additional perspectives we get in the story, because typical with Stephen King novels, at least from the first few that I've seen so far, and the very few I've also read of his prior to my reading series of his books, is that he likes to play with several perspectives. He likes to literally give kind of an omniscient, almost kind of perspective. He always writes in some kind of a third-person omniscient perspective, which, especially in his early works, is really indicative, because each of their perspectives is very in-depth. They are very thorough in discussing what's happening and how things are going. And literally, it makes you feel like you know each person that is involved with the story. I don't think it's necessarily bad by any means, but I will say that similar to the kind of issue I had at first with Salem's Lot when I first had read that book, when I was getting through like the first 100 or so pages, I felt like a lot of the perspectives are very unnecessary. In Salem's Lot, I felt like a lot of the perspectives, I didn't understand at first why there were so many until I got further into the book, which was to explain essentially what was really happening in the town and how each of the people involved in the town were reacting to what was happening. And the same is kind of going on here in The Stand. We basically start off with the person who kind of lets the sickness out, lets the plague out, that is basically going through and killing everybody here in the US. And from there, we see various people that person interacted with, how the sickness spread from him, and then how the sickness spread to all these other people, and how it even traveled from someplace, I think in Texas, all the way up to New York within the span of like 2 days. And just essentially the point of it is to really showcase how quick and how easy these things can be spread, which given the current pandemic state is probably not the best idea to read at the moment, but is very similar in a lot of ways to the way that we kind of are handling and how the epidemic of coronavirus has kind of gone through in the US. I think I see a lot of where there were things that possibly could have been cut from the original story to create the published first edition of this book. The way that Stephen talked about this in the prologue to the book, not even so much a prologue, but like an author's note for the extended edition, is that he really wanted to flesh out the entirety of the world and what was happening. And he does that with all of his books. It doesn't matter really like what's going on. If he has a book that is set in the contemporary world but has these weird elements involved with it, like with how Salem's Lot was, and even how Carrie was, he spends a lot of time really getting into all of the perspectives of people that might be involved with it. He gives names and faces to his characters, even if they are very quick to die in the books. He gives them the time they need and gives them backstories, gives them actual lives, because they are real people in this scenario. And I think that's very fascinating, because I can't even imagine from a writing perspective how much thought would have gone into that in order for it to like make complete sense and for him to not get confused with who was who. Like, that must have taken so much time. So you cannot fault him. You cannot fault Stephen King for how thorough he is when he builds his worlds like this. However, I will say that sometimes that thoroughness is a little much, and I think that it's very hit or miss with whether or not you like the thoroughness of him and his writing, or you don't. And I think that with Salem's Lot, I grew to like it a lot in terms of the thoroughness of like developing the entire town and all the townspeople. The Stand, it's a little harder. And I think mostly that's because I know this book is already super long. So to see a bunch of these perspectives that don't really necessarily have anything to do with the real story, it seems a little unnecessary. I'm a little on the fence with it, because I think I could really take it or leave it. I don't know whether I would take it or leave it kind of thing. I'm kind of not sure. But what I have figured out is by about 140, 150 pages into the book, we do, I think, get established who at least two of the main characters are, because they seem to be minorly, if not at all, affected by this plague. One of them we know is Stu, who everybody who I know who has read this book has said they love him, that he's their favorite character of all time by Stephen King. And I believe the other one is this young man named Nick, who I'm hoping, because I'm only 150 pages in, so I don't even know if he's going to live past this point, but Nick seems to be an interesting character, and I would like to see if he does continue on in the story, because he is deaf and mute, and he is deaf and mute due to a birth defect that he had when he was born. And the way he communicates isn't super offensive. He's not able to speak. I don't believe he knows sign, because obviously the way that he's been communicating with people has been through writing. So I don't think he ever got the opportunity to learn sign language, which is unfortunate, but you know, is a possibility for many people depending on their situation that may be deaf and or mute. What I like to see in the story is that he's a genuinely nice guy. He really tries to, you know, do right by the people that he comes across. Now, he does get the crap beat out of him in the very beginning of his storyline, because there's a few people that don't understand him when he moves to this little town, and he's kind of just drifting along. He doesn't really know where he's going, but he does very easily trust people, and he genuinely does care about the people who do, you know, take care of him, look after him, because he understands that not everyone understands who he is, so he can't necessarily judge everybody else by the same cloth kind of thing. And I really appreciate that. I haven't found anything necessarily to be super offensive. There have been some language issues I've had with it in terms of some of the, I don't know, there's some language issues in terms of race and women that is very notorious in Stephen King's, especially his very early writing, because truthfully, in the early parts of his career, the way he wrote was very similar to what you'll see from a lot of other authors in that time period. The way that they talk to women, the way they treat women, the way that, you know, women are described, that was the norm of the time. And I understand a lot of people really dislike Stephen King because of that, because of the things that they don't like about his writing from some of his older works. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are reading his older works for the first time in this generation, myself included. So it makes it harder for us to really be okay with what Stephen has done, because the thing is like, we and in this generation have very different standards. We have very different ideas of how things should be written, and we have different, you know, levels of like what is okay and what is not. And a lot of Stephen King's early works would not be, I think, as well received now if they had been first published, as opposed to having been published now going on 50 years ago. Like his first book was published in like 1974, I think. So that book is nearly 50 years old. So the thing is though is that it is a product of its time. I understand that, and I think that because I understand the fact that the way that this was written was a way that was written, that everything was written back then in like the 70s and 80s, I am not nearly as offended by these things because I understand that if Stephen was to rewrite this, he'd be a lot more better about the way he writes. Now, I don't know necessarily if some of his newest work still indicates that he, you know, writes in the same way he did back in the 70s and the 80s. Also, keep in mind, during the 70s and the 80s, Stephen King was super involved with drugs and alcohol, from what I understand. So there could be a lot that is dealt with that aspect in how he wrote. But I do know that from people that I know who've read both his old stuff and his new stuff, that Stephen King's writing has changed over the course of time. So it is possible that his newer stuff doesn't really do a lot of the same things that his older stuff did, where he may be more cognizant of how he writes characters. He may be more cognizant of how he uses dialogue. I truly don't know because I've not read really any of his super new stuff. The newest book I read was Dr. Sleep, and that book came out in 2013. Now, I thought Dr. Sleep was really well done. I felt that Dick Halloran in particular, who was a black character that was written, I think, a little weirdly in The Shining back in the 70s. I felt that Dick in Dr. Sleep, while he didn't have a huge role in Dr. Sleep because most of it he was dead because the story is following Danny when he's a grown adult, and Dick was already basically at the end of his life by the beginning of Dr. Sleep. You know, I didn't feel like Dick was written in a way where he was offensive. It didn't seem like he was, you know, portraying stereotypes for black people. But then again, there wasn't much of him. So I truly don't know whether or not that's the same case. But from the one book so far I have read that was some of his more recent work, I haven't seen any issues that I think a lot of people would say were the same from his older works. Like, I will say some of the ways he wrote women in Salem's Lot I wasn't a huge fan of. Some of the way he wrote Wendy in The Shining I wasn't a really big fan of either. You can't look at an author's works from 40, 50 years ago and, you know, make the assumption that they're the same person now, especially when you're like Stephen King, where, like I said, he was addicted to drugs and alcohol in the 70s and 80s. He was basically writing most of his books while under the influence. I feel like you can't go into a story like Stephen King's work and not go into it knowing some of the past of Stephen King and what exactly, you know, he may have been going through at that time. While I think that the arguments against Stephen King's writing are valid, they are very much true in a lot of ways for a lot of his older work. I don't think that we should pigeonhole authors like him. I only say this because I feel like authors like Stephen King, not all, but there are some authors who, like Stephen King, use their writing and their progression in their writing for better, because they take things with criticism and they use it to develop their writing. And I feel like Stephen really was someone who, especially after he got off the drugs and alcohol, changed his writing because it no longer fit the time. It no longer fit a lot of the views that he had that were the same like 40, 50 years ago. Like, the man himself, I think, has changed in a lot of ways. And I think that that has been a huge influence in his writing, because I think that the way that he wrote women in Dr. Sleep was much better than it was in The Shining and Salem's Lot. I thought that the way that he dealt with children was way better. I thought the way he wrote just his main character, Danny, was so well done. Like, there's a lot of reasons why I gave that book a 5-star, because it was absolutely amazing from beginning to end. And I think that a lot of people forget that there are so many authors that are still alive now that were writing way long ago, that they were writing in products of their time. Like, even 50 years ago now, in 1970, the world was so very different in a lot of ways. There are so many things in the world 50 years ago that are different from now in terms of the type of way we speak to each other, the way women are treated, the way people of color are treated. You know, there's so much that has changed from then to now that I think that a lot of people forget that just because things have changed now does not mean that these books that were published so long ago should necessarily change, because what those books showcase is a point in time in how things were discussed, how events were happening, how people were treated. It's like you wouldn't read a history textbook and expect everything to be daisies and rainbows. Like if you're reading a book, for instance, on like the Roman Empire, you're not going to expect, something that's going to tell you everything was hunky-dory and everybody loved the Roman Empire. No, you're going to read, so many different accounts of the Roman Empire and the rule of it and what was done and how the rulers handled things. So it doesn't make sense to me how we can take a fictional author like Stephen King and say that his work is super offensive now when you're reading his books now, but the books themselves that you're reading were published 50, 40 years ago. I guess my big problem is that I understand why people are angry about why Stephen's writing is awful. However, they're not even willing to try some of his newer stuff because they're so set in their ways about his old stuff, when his old stuff is a product of its time. Like, if you really want to see how an author has changed over the course of time, read the old stuff and then read the new stuff. That's why I'm doing this reading series, because I want to see how his career has essentially changed over the last nearly 50 years. Like, the man has written so many books. I think upwards of like 80 some books, not just fiction, but the man has done so much with his writing, has created vast worlds, essentially created the Dark Tower world that spans several books, not just the Dark Tower series, but several other short story collections and novels that, it doesn't make sense to me to have somebody read something from his past that was a fixed point in time that, expressed a certain idea he had or thoughts he may have had, and not also then read something newer of his that may very well have very different ways of talking about things, because the man himself in the last 40, 50 years will have changed. And even if he didn't, it would showcase how the man's writing has or has not progressed. I feel like everybody gets so bent out of shape about how he writes when all they do is they only read his old stuff. That was a fixed point in time in his career that was written in a way that was a product of its time. Like, read some of the new stuff. If you're that upset with how he writes, maybe some of the new stuff you'll like better. And the same goes with classics. Like, yeah, H.P. Lovecraft was a fucking racist. He was like one of the most evil people when it came to how he treated people of color. I don't believe any of his work really indicated that, but then again, I've only read one story of his, and it didn't involve black people, to my knowledge, which may be an issue in and of itself. But here's the thing. Any classic author, H.P. Lovecraft, Emily Dickinson, who was a poet, any classic writer that you can think of is gonna have some kind of, issue involved with it in terms of how they talk about something or how they say something, because it's not how we would do things now. Why don't we just actually look at the stories as a product of their time and see what was being discussed at that time? I feel like that should be more of the real conversation. Like, yes, we can discuss all day long about how H.P. Lovecraft was a racist and how he may or may not have, used some of his racist ideas and tendencies in his books. I truly don't know. Somebody can educate me on that. I would love to know. But you also have to look at the way that he wrote his stories and what they did in terms of developing a genre that would otherwise have probably not gotten as much traction. We know Mary Shelley was pretty much the creator of the supernatural science fiction area, but H.P. Lovecraft was pretty up there too. He created the whole story of Cthulhu, which brought on a whole religion of people and really developed the idea of science fiction in a lot of ways. And while we can say he was an absolute racist, you also have to look at the content of the story and see what's being discussed and understand that what is being discussed were things that were, timely at that point. Like, we read so many books now that we say are timely. We say, you know, really speak to these different things that are happening currently in our world. It just seems really silly to me how we can look at a piece of classic literature or a book by somebody that was written 30, 40, 50 years ago and say that it's ridiculous and how it's offensive and all these things, when truthfully, most of classic literature is offensive because they were written in points in time that were so very different than how we see things today. My point really is with all of this that I feel like we put too much hatred toward the author when they write something that seems offensive, is offensive, but it's a book that was written so long ago and has so much rooted in its past that we don't even take it into the idea that either the author could have changed if they have some new things currently out, or if it's a piece of literature from someone who's been long dead, we don't even take the opportunity to understand how that snapshot, that book is a snapshot of history, and how that snapshot shows us what was the thought process then? What was the ideas floating around then? People are so quick to hate classics because they promote these awful things about women and all these different things about people of color. And that's true, they do. But if we are going to grow as writers, as readers, as advocates, we have to know how far we've come. We have to know how people back then had thought about these things and how that's different from today, or how it may not be different from today, and what we can do to push for a different kind of narrative if that is what we want to do. So it has been a hot minute. It is today, Wednesday, I almost said October. No, it's not October, August 19th. It's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I finishing up a break here from work, but truthfully, I've been working so hard today that I'm just super tired, and I just wanted to take a quick break because I haven't really been able to update you guys in a few days, because like I said, this vlog was going to basically be me piecing things together, like when I felt like I wanted to update, stuff like that. So currently with The Stand, I'm still quite under, I think 25% of the way through. I'm on page 242 at the moment, chapter 28, 27, 28, 28. Just looked at it and I didn't even remember the number. That's how my day's been. I think this is a book that doesn't really seem to have an overarching plot in particular. I feel like this is kind of how Desperation was for me when I first read it, where the story is more focused on the characters. And again, I think that back to how Salem's Lot kind of was, where the book is more so focused on the characters and how they all traverse this big event that's happening. And there is a kind of underlying plot in a sense, or like there's an underlying reason why everything is happening, and you don't find out really what that is until like much later in the story, or like you only get bits and pieces of it as the story goes on, as you're seeing these characters kind of traverse what's happening. That kind of seems to be the thing that's happening here. However, what I will say is we are starting to see, like I think I said in the last clip, I may have said this, but we are seeing at this point that there are some fairly important people in this story, where there are people who haven't been able to get sick from this flu epidemic that happens. And the way that the story pans out is like you have all these different characters who are dying left, right, and center because they're contracting this flu. But then there are some people like Larry Underwood and Stu who are pretty important characters. You kind of get that they're very important characters from their first interactions because there seem to be a lot delved into them, that they are likely to be characters who are going to stand the test of time. They're actually going to survive this whole thing. But then there's also other things that are happening. Like you're literally seeing everything happen in this world. I'm enjoying it. I actually really am. I am loving like taking my time to read it, but I feel like I'm also so intimidated by it that it's taking me longer to read it because I'm just like, it's not that I don't want to read it. It's like I'm just so intimidated by it that it's like it's harder for me to find the motivation to read it, basically. I also am feeling a little weird recently. Things have been going pretty okay. I had my bridal shower here this past Saturday on the 15th, and Robert and I have figured out a lot of stuff regarding our wedding that we are planning on doing, but it's like this week for some reason I'm feeling kind of run down. I think because the last couple of weekends have been a little crazy, and this Saturday I'm actually helping my sister summer with moving to college. So that's going to be an all-day event. So I will be taking this with me because we are going to be having to drive about 2 hours from my parents' house to her college, and then it's going to be like a 2-hour drive back. So I will be reading this while we're on the drive. But the thing is like, I think that it's a mix of like my own personal like tiredness and lack of motivation, and the fact that I don't really have a lot of time in the evening to spend, reading anymore, or like when I do have the time, I don't really want to. I would much rather watch something to kind of like ease my brain a little bit, that it's kind of taking me a while to get through this. And then also on top of that, I am very intimidated by the story, so it's taking me longer because it's like, oh my gosh, I have so much that I have to read, like this is ridiculous. But basically how this month has been going has been pretty much me reading this almost exclusively. I did read one other book and listen to parts of an audiobook that I've been working on for the last few weeks. But this has pretty much been otherwise the only other thing I've read, and I think it's going to probably continue through the rest of the month. I do want to try to finish this at the end of the month, though, because I have plans for September, and I also don't want to take too much more time with this vlog. So my thoughts are currently, though, I like it. It's fine. I like this kind of story it is, but you have to go into it knowing that this is not really a plot-driven story. It is literally looking at the characters and how they are adapting and how they are responding to this big stimuli that happens at the beginning of the book with this flu epidemic basically happening. Hey y'all, it is August 25th, I believe. It's just after 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm currently on page 350. I'm on chapter 38 right now, and apparently there's a second wave of sorts that goes through with this flu epidemic that happens in this book. It doesn't really say what happens as of yet, just that as it started to wind down from the first one, where like a lot of the world was basically wiped out and we had like quite a few survivors from it. There's a second epidemic that lasts for about 2 weeks, and it's more common, like it's basically takes over more in like the bigger countries, like the more populated countries like the US, and in kind of the more undeveloped countries it doesn't affect it as much. Basically, like it says in the United States, the second epidemic took about 16% of the super flu survivors. So this second wave basically like is a bigger strain of this flu of some kind, and it's stronger, and so it basically goes through more of the survivors. Like it basically cuts another percentage of them out. But in more underdeveloped places like Peru and Senegal, which I wouldn't consider them underdeveloped, maybe that's just my ignorance to how the countries are set up, I don't know, but I've never considered any country really underdeveloped unless it's like something where like there's not even really running water, which I think that in Peru there is. But anyway, they say in underdeveloped countries like those in this book, it is no more than 3% of the super flu survivors are killed. I like that I'm reading the extended version. I don't feel like it's really that bad, but I feel like it's not necessarily the most like amazing book in the world either. I'm kind of sitting at a 3-star with it because I think it's objectively it's a really good story. Like I really like what it's doing. I like that it's following, characters that are surviving and like going through and, telling their story and not really having so much more of a plot than that. But I do think, in my own personal opinion, it is very slow. I feel like that by 350 pages, we would have had some kind of major thing happen to where characters could start coming together, but that's not the case. And I also think, in my personal opinion, I just don't feel like I'm connecting with anybody, and I think that's part of the reason that I feel like it's so slow, is I'm not really connecting with anyone, and I think it's also because there's so many characters that we're looking into and that we're, going back and forth in terms of perspective from. And Stephen King, just in general, I feel like when he has a large cast of characters, has an issue with this, because I kind of felt this in Desperation, where I didn't really feel like I connected with a lot of the characters, and with other books he's written also in the past that I've read, like Salem's Lot, for instance, I felt like I keep comparing this to Salem's Lot and Desperation because they're two books that stand out in my mind that remind me a lot of this in terms of like the writing and the structure of the story. But basically, like with Salem's Lot, I felt like also there were so many characters that play with that I really did like, but I felt like the only person I connected with was the writer character, who was mostly the main character of that story. Like, you kind of got towards the end of the story, you're like, oh, he's kind of the lone guy that we're really supposed to be following, but we're also getting all these perspectives from everybody else because, you know, we have to build the story, build the world, figure out what the hell's going on in this town. So that's kind of how The Stand is like, we have all these different characters building the world, building on an understanding of like how it's affecting all these different characters and what's happening to them. And like I said, we haven't really hit a point where anyone is starting to come together. There is one place, though, I feel like that I just read about that was mentioned in the book that I feel like may possibly be a converging point for the book, but it's going to depend on like how the rest of the characters, you know, if they find out about this place that was mentioned. I just feel like now that since I've seen 2 sets of characters talk about going to like the Vermont area, there may be some overlap. We may see some people actually interacting with each other to like maybe figure out what's going on and bring whoever might be responsible for this down. Hi guys, so it is, I think now the 26th, 27th of August. I don't quite know. I'll have to like make a note of it or something, but I am currently still about less than 500 pages into the book. I am on page 481 right now. Something I wanted to talk about, which is going to be a little spoilery, and I'll leave a timestamp. Like, I'll basically, like, this whole clip will basically have spoilers in it, so I'll make sure to have it timestamped where the next section will be non-spoilery something. So make sure to go to that timestamp that is here in the video and should be down in the description, I think. I think that's how timestamps work now, is you put them in the description and it like automatically puts them in your video on YouTube. So there's been a little bit of a development that I guess I didn't really catch until now in terms of what exactly this virus is and what's going on. There is another element to it, which is something that everyone so far that's a survivor has survived, not only the first wave of the plague, but the second wave of it are experiencing. And that is these weird dreams that are happening where they're seeing this man in black, essentially. They don't know if it's a black man, like race-wise, or if it is a man shrouded in black at the very least, like a fat phantasm of some kind. Anyway, all of them have these dreams where this person is chasing them. And there's a character that comes up in this book that I didn't think about before, but would make sense if he is somehow involved with it. And his name is Randall Flaggs. I don't know necessarily if Randall Flaggs is this man in black that everyone is afraid of, that is like supposedly going to bring the end of the world or something like that. Like, he's kind of like that big ultimate villain. And I think he has something to do, the man in black himself has something to do with like the testing that was going on for this disease that was being spread to the people. Now, I don't know if he's supposed to be like a living manifestation of that disease, or if he was some kind of engineered entity, or if he is an entity of sorts that basically is like death himself or the devil or something. I'm not sure what that is, and I have a feeling that Randall is kind of supposed to be this man in black. I wonder if at this point, like, having now gotten into the first couple chapters of book 2 of The Stand, if now we're going to see Randall Flagg become this guy that is going to basically be the living entity of this plague or something. Because what is also happening is that with these dreams that people are having of this man in black chasing them and trying to kill them, is there is this other woman who we're gonna, I think, see her first chapter involved here in chapter 45. Her name is Mother Abigail. She is an old black woman who is somehow like not necessarily a savior character, I don't think, but she is somehow affiliated with what's going on. She's like a protector of sorts to them. She basically, all of the people involved in the story, they all have dreams also with her where she's like, come out to me, I'm in Colorado, I'll keep you safe, we'll be safe from this man in black for some time before we can figure out how to bring him down. And the woman is like over 100 years old, I think, too, which is really weird because like, you wouldn't think someone who's like over 100 years old, I think she's like 102 is what this said in the book, you wouldn't think someone like that would be able to like handle anything, let alone like be able to communicate with people. But so there's something to do with her, and she is somehow supposed to be a protector of sorts for this group of people, because there's a lot of people now involved, because let me just run down the list for you of everybody we have that's still alive. We have Stu Redman, we have Francis, we have Harold, who is a friend of Francis's, we have Larry Underwood, we have a woman now that we've just met through Larry's perspective, a woman named Nadine, and a young boy named Joe, a young Asian boy who isn't necessarily mute, but he doesn't have like the same speech capabilities as a lot of kids, and Nadine and Joe know each other. Then we also have Nick Andros, who is a deaf mute character, and we have a character named Tom Cullen, who is also, he's not deaf mute, but he is also a little slower, similar to Joe. Tom is able to speak, he's able to create coherent sentences, but he has this kind of mental disability of sorts that's described where like he can't necessarily make connections very well. He can't really string together like thoughts very well, but when he does, they are very clear and he gets very excited about it. So probably some kind of mental disability of some sorts. The book though does use the R word in a lot of ways, and truthfully it does bug me in a lot of ways, but also this was written in a time where that word was not considered like a slur of any kind, so I kind of have to not necessarily forgive the book, but I am aware that the time period that this was written in is very different than how it is now. So the R word is not really, well, it isn't used very much anymore unless you don't understand what the word means or anything like that. So keep that in mind if you go into reading this, that the R word is used very much in terms of talking about Tom Cullen. And then we meet a couple other side characters. There is a character that shows up in Larry's perspective. Her name is Lucy. Very late in like his chapter, she shows up and is like tagging along with them. And then very late in one of Nick's chapters, the last chapter I've read of Nick, which was I think the end of book 1, was them meeting another woman. I don't remember what her name is, but she kind of is psychotic. Like she's basically like very attention seeking, and I don't know if she's gonna continue living. I don't know if she's gonna die at some point, but she seems like a character that could just be like a throwaway character of sorts. But so yeah, we've got all of these people, and we have Frances too, like I said earlier, and she's pregnant, so there's a whole issue with that, and I don't think anybody knows she's pregnant other than her. I don't think Harold knows. I don't think she's told him that, because I think she's been trying to hide it, but she's already at this point in the story 3 months pregnant, so she's not gonna be able to hide it for very long. So all of them now are being sent over to Nebraska where this woman lives, and they are going to, I said Colorado earlier. She wants them to go to Colorado, I think, with her, but I think she's in Nebraska currently. Or she told Nick to go to Nebraska, and she's telling other people to go to Colorado because they're all already so far away that by the time they get to Nebraska, these people will be gone. So it's a little confusing. Now to go into the less spoilery thoughts of this book. So far, about 500 pages in, I'm a little under halfway done with it at this point. I am liking the story. I do think there is a little bit of a plot coming up. I think that we now have gotten to a point in the story where all of the character ties are starting to come together. There are characters that have been coming together. They're starting to make their way together to a point where they can possibly go after the big bad guy that is basically involved in the story. There's a lot of layers to, I think, what the story is in terms of the bad guy and who's really the villain. I haven't quite got to that point as of yet, but there is a character that I believe is kind of the manifestation of evil within the story, which is very common in a lot of King stories. He's done it in several stories I've read of as of yet, where he might not necessarily have like a specific evil thing, but he may have a character that's like the embodiment of evil, if that makes sense. Like there might be something that happens in a story that people are like, you know, like a plague, or something happens that is very negative, but it doesn't necessarily have any kind of like one particular human being at the back of it that started it all, but there is also a character that is kind of the embodiment of evil that's played throughout the story. That's kind of like what I think the story is going for. And so I think where we're at now in the story is, like I said, all the survivor characters are coming together to go off and defeat that big bad guy, but that probably will not happen for a good long while. The last 100 or so pages I've read have really mostly just been about the survivor characters and like how their story's been going. We've gotten so far less and less of like these extraneous characters that have just died off left and right and center. Hey guys, it is August 30th today, and my goal for today is to read the last less than 300 pages of The Stand. I've already read a chapter so far today, which was about 25 pages, I think. So I'm already started. I'm on chapter 58, and I'm just waiting for some lunch to get delivered here, but I think I'm gonna set timers. I've been setting timers the last couple of days to read for essentially like an hour, or at least read a chapter within an hour, and then I sometimes take a break and do my research for Buddhism, because I'm getting back into that because I've missed researching it. And truthfully, even though I'm no longer writing the book that I was going to be writing with this research, I still am invested in it. I like researching it in general. Like, it was kind of just one of those things where like I wanted to research it anyway, so I figured I'd do it for this book, but now I'm no longer writing the book, that kind of thing. So I am, though, I think this time going to try to read for the entirety of the hour. I just hate how sometimes I get like stuck in the middle of a chapter and there's not like a break. So that's why I tend to like read a chapter within an hour and then do something else for a while. But I think today I did that once already today, and I think I'm just going to focus on reading for a while because it's already about 12:20 in the afternoon. I woke up at like 10:30 this morning and didn't actually start reading until about 11. So I really want to finish this though, because like I said, I have less than 300 pages. It's getting to the point where like things aren't really coming to a head as of yet. Like, we still haven't quite reached the climax, but we're getting there. So far, I think the way that I would rate this based on how things are going now is it's a 4-star. Like, it's actually really good. The issues I have though are, like I said before, the fact that it's very slow paced. I see there were a lot of places where Stephen King probably had to cut stuff from here. And I feel like there are just some characters that are a little too flat. Truthfully, even though we're now 879 pages into the book, there's still a couple characters I feel like are very, very flat, but that's because they're more secondary characters as opposed to like full-fledged characters like Stu, Larry, Franny, Harold, Nadine. Like, there's very distinct characters in this book, and like you see their progress. But then there's like secondary characters that are involved like in this, like Glenn, Sue, Trash Can Man. Like, they don't really have much substance to them yet, and I don't think we will get that because I think that they're just supposed to be more so secondary characters, and you know, we're not supposed to get the full-fledged stories of them in any way, or like not see everything about them, because we don't really even get perspectives from them. They kind of just come in and out in passing. Nick is another really good like primary character that I think is like really important. Wish me luck. It's gonna be an interesting day. I read 170 pages yesterday. I took quite a bit of a break, even though I didn't really want to. I just did because my brain was starting to hurt, I think. But today I am determined to read the last 270 some pages today before the end of the day. And even if I don't finish it today, I do still have tomorrow before the month is up. So that's also really helpful. So if I don't finish it today, I could finish it tomorrow and still be kind of on track for everything regarding the Bookoplathon that I'm doing in September. Okay guys, I am in the last 100 pages and I am so sad. One of my favorite characters I think is basically dead, and I don't know how to feel. I'm so fucking upset because it was not the way that I imagined this character going out. I hate that so much. I hate when my favorite characters, like, when they have to die, they don't die in the like best way possible that I think that they deserve. Like, it just, oh, it makes me so angry. But we haven't quite reached the climax still as of yet. I am just now under 100 pages. I think I'm like 97 pages left till the end of the book, and we have not reached the climax yet. We are getting very close to it though, because basically we're getting to the point where like the main characters that are still alive at this point are now going to confront the bad guy. So we'll see if that final boss battle, if you will, ends up working out in our favor. Quite a few characters have died, though, in the last, I would say, probably 100 pages I've read so far today. A lot of characters that I didn't expect to die as early as they did, or at all. And I sustained a reading injury because I went to pick up my book from the heavier side where all of the red pages were, and my nail broke really far back, so it fracking hurts. But yeah, that's been my day. Yeah, but it is now about 10 to 6 in the evening. I am going to take a break here because, like, now that I'm about 100 pages shy, I think I could probably get that done this evening, maybe before I go to bed. But I want to take a little bit of a break because I've literally been sitting here since about 11 o'clock this morning, almost reading nonstop, and I've now read like 200 pages actually, because I was at 298 until the end. So I've already read 200 pages in the span of like 6 hours, almost 7 hours actually. So time for a break. Hopefully get through the rest of this later today. If not, I'll definitely be getting through the very last bit of it tomorrow during my breaks with work, which would be fine because, like I said, tomorrow is still August. Tomorrow is the 31st, so I still have a little bit of time to finish this up. But my thought is that probably after dinner or something tonight, I may read more of it and then read some more of it before I go to bed, kind of thing. I don't know how late I'm gonna be up because I want to try to start waking up about 6:30 in the morning, because I want to actually like get dressed and, you know, take a shower and stuff like that. And because I've been feeling really kind of run down, and I feel like it's because I stopped having a normal routine months ago, and I'm kind of now in a point where I want to get back to a routine of sorts. Even though I'm still working from home, even though I'm still not really leaving the house much at this point. It's finally done. All right, folks, grab a drink, grab a snack, something, sit down, get comfy, because we're going to start talking about my thoughts on The Stand and going into a lot of the story. Today, I have read just under 300 pages, which is bonkers. I did not expect that to happen. I thought that this was going to be one of those nights where about 11 o'clock I'd get too sleepy and reserve the last like 30 pages to tomorrow, but that did not happen. I pushed through, I did it, and I'm gonna put this down now because this is a really heavy book. Like, I think the book by itself is probably about 8 pounds. So The Stand was first written by Stephen King and published in 1978. Now, the original book clocked in, I think, somewhere between 700 to 800 pages. This particular edition I have is 1,153 pages of like story text. There is an author's note in the beginning of this particular edition from Stephen King when this was republished in 1990 that basically dictated a lot of the thoughts about when he first published it and why exactly he decided to come out with an extended and uncut edition. This is not necessarily absolutely everything that he had originally had when it came to when he first wrote this book before he had to make cuts for publication purposes, but this pretty much has almost everything there. He did say there were some scenes that that when he had gone back and looked at them for a second time or third or fourth time when going to make the extended uncut edition, that there were some scenes that he definitely felt did not have a purpose in the book, and so he did end up doing away with them. But every scene that he pretty much absolutely wanted originally for this book is in this book. So the story of The Stand takes place in 1990, where there is this massive superflu that arises around May, and essentially it is similar to the normal flu with the symptoms, but it is much more aggressive, and people usually, once they get it, they die in as little as 24 hours, upwards to about a week. And it is very contagious. Like, it is airborne, waterborne, like everybody is able to pretty much get it. And people literally start dying left, right, and center. However, we get to a point where there are several individuals who we find are not able to get the superflu. They are considered immune. And there's not really a clear reason as to, first of all, how the flu started. That's never really discussed. There are theories that go around, and I think that you find out fairly early on that there is some kind of government involvement, but it's never fully developed. There is no reason as to why the people who are immune. That is never really gone into, because it is something that none of the characters are able to find out. It's just not something that is commonly known among the characters that we are seeing the perspectives of. And there's no telling as to exactly what the repercussions are of this thing that has happened, and we only see the repercussions as the story goes on. Essentially what happens is most of the entire world is wiped out. The population of the entire earth is diminished greatly to where we have no idea really how many people are still around. The story mostly takes place within a quite large cast of characters that are essentially the first wave of survivors. Now, I will say this is one of the, I think, the drawbacks to the story is that you don't really know who the main people of the story are going to be until you get about 400 pages into the extended uncut edition. Now, this is a big thing as to what I was saying earlier as to why I think this book was severely cut when it came to the published version that was published in 1978. Is because the first 400 pages of the story, for the majority of it, is looking at not really any particular people that you would think to be main characters. There are several people who get multiple points of view within the story. Like, you have Stu, you have Franny, Larry, who seem to be kind of like the inklings of our main characters, but then we have several perspectives from people who just, die, and we don't really get to see who the main characters are until very, very far into the story. Now, I don't necessarily think it was a bad thing for this to happen, and I understand why King really wanted to use these particular scenes of people that had no purpose to the story other than to build the world with understanding how the sickness took over very many people and how it affected different kinds of people and how quick some people died and how long it took for some people to die, kind of thing, kind of giving more to flesh out the world. This is something that's very common in a King story. He tends to flesh out his worlds very, very thoroughly, and I think that that is why a lot of people tend to stray away from these books, because what that does is that really slows everything down, because everything that we can think of is thrown into the story and it slows down the pacing. Now, I will say that, like I said, I didn't necessarily think it was a bad thing, but I do understand that going into that mindset and knowing that that's his kind of thing about writing, especially when he was fairly early in his career, especially when he was, on drugs and drinking a lot very early in his writing career, that it does not surprise me that those particular chapters, that the first 400 pages, it would not surprise me if many of the chapters and many of the sections that were written in those chapters were ultimately removed from the first published piece, because they don't really seem to have much of a purpose. And I can see from an editor's perspective, if you have a limit to how much you are able to print per book, which there is, that is something that has to be taken into account. Editors and publishers have to look into how big a book is, how much it's going to cost for them to print one copy of that, and how much do they think that they are going to sell of that. That is a huge thing, because publishing is a business. You have to know how much you're putting into your product and then figure figure out how much you can possibly get out of that product to offset the cost of building the product in the first place. So it does not surprise me that from an editor and publisher's perspective that they would cut so much of this, thinking that it's not really that important and it would drive down the cost of the production of the book itself. One of the other things that needs to be taken into account of this is, like I said, the characters. There is a very large cast of characters. Several of them we don't really see much of a perspective from because they're kind of more secondary characters. Characters like Glenn and Tom Cullen and Sue Stern and Harold. Harold I consider more of a main character in a lot of ways. He's kind of like that weird tier between main and secondary character, but there is a large cast of characters because there's a lot of people involved in this and a lot of people get intertwined with each other. The whole story is essentially about all of these survivors coming together when the world is basically ravaged apart and then they have to essentially rebuild civilization. There is large themes too of things like good versus evil because there is a character involved in the story that is looked at as kind of a devil figure. He is considered to be kind of the representation and manifestation of evil. There's another character who we don't really meet until book 2, which is, I want to say, like 500 pages into the book, 400, 500 pages into the book, that we kind of consider as a not god figure but a prophet or prophetess of sorts because she is a female, and she's also the oldest character in the entire book, with clocking in at 108 years. King has this very interesting thing about looking at religion in particular and the kind of battle between good and evil and how religion kind of plays into that kind of theme, because any kind of religious story you read, there are stories within that talk about, good and evil, Cain versus Abel, Adam and Eve versus the snake kind of thing. There's a lot of stories, not just in Christianity, but in various religions that dictate the story of like good versus evil. The Stand, I think, plays more on a Christianity perspective because we have somebody like the devil and we have a lot of references to God. But one of the things I really liked about this was that it wasn't just the entirety of the story being about good versus evil. There was a lot of lead up into it that was a survival, pandemic, post-apocalyptic story, is that you had all these people who were trying to figure out what's next, and they found out that what was next was figuring out how to help this old woman with essentially bringing down the manifestation of evil that had arisen after the plague had gone through and killed a bunch of people. And so we see that these people essentially have their own morals and their own thoughts and religious ideas questioned. There's a lot of talk about in this book about how some people kind of, may have the best of intentions when it comes to what they think is right, and they sometimes just have errors in their ways, and they have to live with that because the decisions that they make based on what they believe is right, they will have to live with. There is a lot that I really would like to go into, but I feel like I'm also not one of those people that can just really spew a lot on like theocracy and philosophy and all these things because I'm not well versed in those areas. I think, though, if you go into anything with King, you have to know that one of his major themes is this idea of religion, and it's a big thing, especially within religion, the idea of good versus evil. We see this in like Salem's Lot, we see this in Desperation, we see this in Revival. There's various stories other than The Stand where King writes on these things. It's a very prevalent theme. It's a very common theme that you will see in a lot of his work. Now, I'm not sure why he's so fixated on that, but what's interesting is that looking at the different ways that each of those stories I mentioned, The Stand, Salem's Lot, Desperation, and Revival, the way that those 4 books each talk about good versus evil and religion is very different from each other, which shows that King is actually able to write on the idea of good versus evil in several different ways by looking at the idea of good versus evil within things like religion and showcasing how it can manifest itself in different ways and how different kinds of people can respond to these different ideas and how they can become affected by these things. Like, it's very fascinating when you look at, some of like King's older work and then some of his more recent work. I would recent meaning like 90s, early 2000s kind of stuff, which I think I have read, and older stuff being like The Stand and Salem's Lot. The themes stay consistent, but the way he writes about them change from each book to the next. And I think that this also plays very well into like what the Dark Tower series goes into, because from what I remember of having read the Dark Tower, which I think was published, let me look at my notes here, was published in 1982, you know, the themes of the Dark Tower relate to good and evil as well, because we have the gunslinger, and that who's a good guy, and then we have the man in black, who is the manifestation of the devil. So, you know, there's so much of King's work that is dedicated to this idea of good versus evil, and especially in terms of, I believe, Christianity in particular. As far as the characters, I feel like for the most part, they were fine. I feel like, though, one of the biggest gripes I have with this is I feel like there were some in particular that I didn't get enough from, and that's mostly because they were characters that either died earlier than I expected, or they just didn't get as much time as I wanted to fully understand them. Namely, characters like Harold, Trash Can Man, and Tom Cullen even. I feel like those three characters are... Oh, and Sue Stern, too. I really wanted to know more about Sue Stern. But those four characters are characters that were, like, more on the minuscule side. They were more minor characters as opposed to, like, the big main characters. I feel like all of the minor characters we just didn't get nearly enough time with for me to fully feel like they were fleshed out. And that is something I feel like is one of my bigger gripes with King, is I feel like as much as he puts work into the world, and as much as he puts work into building, like, a huge theme of the story, his characters are the most lacking in a lot of ways. I think that is one of the big things I always seem to have an issue with, is that his characters are not always super complex. I feel like they're very surface level. We see that, like, with characters like Stu, who is probably the only exception to this, that he is multifaceted, as well as Larry. Larry and Stu, I think, are the only two characters in this entire book that I felt I really truly understood as people. Everybody else was kind of just very surface level, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, considering that this is a book that is not really so much about the characters as much about how the characters respond to what's going on. But I felt like I really couldn't connect with a lot of them. And I feel like that's always been a drawback to King with me, is his lack of depth for characters. I don't know if that is something that changes over the course of time. That's why I wanted to do this reading series of reading his books publication-wise, in order to see if some things that, like, maybe he did in the past don't really happen anymore, or if there are things that he didn't do that he starts to do more in his newer books, or what have you. But I feel like, in particular, the characters themselves were fine. Like, they were cool characters. I really liked a lot of them. There were a lot that I really disliked for various reasons. Not because that they were bad characters, but they were just evil in general. But I just, in general, feel like even the ones I really did like, I didn't get enough substance from them to really feel like I connected with all of them. But they were likable enough to where I was rooting for the right characters, if that makes sense. The extended and uncut edition makes it seem like this book has no plot. I will say that right off the bat, because, like I said before, with the fact that, like, the first 400 pages of the book seems to be nothing but just really seeing what the characters do when it comes to the flu coming around, and then the immediate after effects of the flu. The book is very slow. The pacing is incredibly slow for the uncut and extended edition. Now, if I had read the original published version first before reading this one, maybe I could tell you whether or not the pacing was different from the published version to this one. But I have not. I did not have access to that. You go into this, you have to know the pacing is snail's pace. It is so slow until probably you get into book 2, because book 2 is when a lot of stuff starts actually happening. We actually have characters that meet up with each other, groups of characters that we had in different areas of the country meet up with each other. They start building a community. You know, that's when things start to actually pick up. And then within book 2, toward the end of it, we also see the beginnings of a revolution against the evil character. Finally, the last thing I would like to talk about in terms of this, and to keep it as spoiler free as possible, is that as long as it is, as slow as it was for the first third quarter of the book, as shallow as I felt some of the characters were, I enjoyed this book immensely. I felt like it was so gratifying, truthfully, to get to the very end of it after having spent now a couple months over the time trying to finish it. And I think in general, objectively, the book is actually really good because of the fact of what I said earlier about the idea of good versus evil and the way that the story was created. I like the idea that the story didn't necessarily have a plot and was focused more on how the characters respond to what's happening in this environment. Like, you have a stimulus and you're seeing the response to that stimulus, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I felt like the story itself was actually really freaking good. The Stand by Stephen King, the extended uncut edition, gets a 4 out of 5 stars from me. I truly enjoyed it in a lot of ways. I felt like it was just a good book in general, but it had some issues, and that's always, you know, the case with, you know, Stephen King. You're not always going to like everything he writes, and no matter how much, you know, you may like him as an author, you're not always going to like everything that he puts out, and that's just the fact of life. Not every author you love is going to put out a 5-star read. There's going to be some hits, there's going to be some misses, there's going to be some that, you know, weren't too bad, but had some issues, and then there's going to be some that had quite a lot of issues that may not really be that good. But I think in general, I'm just more so proud of myself for finally getting through this one, and I'm actually really happy to have read it because I remember so many people telling me that when I was getting into Stephen King that this was their favorite. This is, I believe, my aunt and my grandmother's favorite book by Stephen King, I think, other than The Dark Tower. And to now read it and understand why they love it and why they love some of these characters that were in this book that I remember them vividly talking about, it kind of just, it puts a new perspective on a lot of stuff for me, and it makes me really excited to see more of what King had written during this time, because this was his very first epic fantasy, if you will. It wasn't really a fantasy, but this was his first like epic story, and I'm floored at what I experienced with this. So I hope you guys enjoyed this vlog. I know it's fairly long, and I did want to include a review of this. Ow, that fucking hurt. I will be doing more of these vlogs over the course of September, and I'm also just really happy that now I have the last day of August off before I start my Bookopoly-thon stuff on September 1st. But anyway, let me know what your guys' thoughts were on The Stand by Stephen King if you read it. If you read the original and you read the extended and uncut edition, let me know what your thoughts were between the two. Did you feel like that the published version was actually pretty good and was much better than, you know, what King had to offer with the extended? Or do you feel like the extended version was actually way better than the published because the extended ended up actually giving more of the story that you wanted? Let me know your guys' thoughts. I would love to hear it, especially from everyone who's read both versions, to get an idea of how the published one was for a lot of people. So thank you all so much for joining me in this video. If you guys did enjoy it, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you haven't already and you'd like to be, hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye, guys.